Welcome to the Purvis Versus podcast. My name is Eric Purvis. I am an RMT, course creator, continuing education provider, and advocate for evidence-based massage therapy. Thank you for being here today. In this episode, I welcome Whitney Lowe, who is a massage therapist from Sisters, Oregon. Whitney has been a leader in high-quality massage therapy education in the U.S. for almost 30 years. In this episode, we focus on the importance of providing effective massage therapy education at both the entry to practice level as well as for experienced clinicians through continuing education. Enjoy this episode, and I hope you have as much fun listening to it as we did recording it. Well, hello, everybody. I'm excited to have the wonderful Whitney Lowe here. Some of you might know him. He's a massage therapist based in Sisters, Oregon. And from those of us in Canada who don't have any idea where that is, it's about 3 hours from Portland. And some of you may know Whitney too from his podcast, which he does called The Thinking Practitioner. And your co-host on that is a name that I'm never going to say correctly, so you can correct me who that is.
All right.
But thanks for being
it's
here.
Luca.
Say again?
Yeah, it's Luca. Till Luca.
Yeah. Luca. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Till Luca. I should have asked you that before we started recording. But thanks for being here. Whitney, just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so thank you again, first of all, for the invitation to be here and to chat with you. This is always a great opportunity to chat and get into some goodies. But yeah, I've been a massage therapist about 35 years. Originally trained down in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where I did my initial training and did some graduate work down there in sports medicine and biomechanics, as well as in psychology. And eventually found my way back out here to the great Pacific Northwest in the U.S. Ended up here in Oregon in the mid-90s and have been primarily focused on clinically working with pain and injury conditions. I did some work back in Atlanta in a couple of physical therapy and chiropractic clinics, but also a really good stint in an orthopedic clinic that was affiliated with Emory University Medical School back in Atlanta, and got real interested in pain and injury conditions and sort of the world of orthopedics. But also was teaching in a massage school at that time, and recognizing those two things were kind of coming together, that there was a wealth of information out there that I thought would really help massage therapists, and they didn't have easy access to a lot of that content. So I got very involved with education and producing educational materials and training programs, and that eventually morphed into online programs and other kinds of resources, books and DVDs, videos, and all that kind of stuff. So that's been my sort of primary focus for the last couple of decades, is trying to get the word out, get information out, and help other people to help other people.
That's great, Whitney. And it's such a common thing, too, that a lot of us that are getting the education, that are trying to be educators, is we tend to have this desire, like we have all this information that we just want people to know.
Yeah.
Just trying to give it to people because we have this belief or this knowledge of, like, if you learn this stuff, you're going to help more people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's such a thing, that an honorable thing that, I think that we need more RMT or MT educators out there that are willing to deliver really good quality stuff.
Yeah. And I think that gets into another issue about this, which is, and this is something I didn't mention, is that, for the last probably, 10, 15 years, my emphasis has been not only on, continuing to, work on learning more about this whole field and the things that we're doing, but I've become extremely passionate about learning science and trying to learn how to be a good educator, because I think many of us have probably experienced that too, is going to courses or classes or things like that with somebody who you heard was really knowledgeable and knew a lot of stuff, but it turns out they're not quite a great teacher, and a lot of people don't realize that that's a very separate skill set of just being a really good clinician. And being a good teacher. Those two things are not the same. And so I'm also super passionate about trying to find ways to build better learning experiences for students so that they can get more out of the things that we're doing.
It's hard being an educator and being a good educator because it's not easy. You can have all the knowledge in your head, but if you can't translate that to people that are paying to take your stuff, then it's kind of lost. I know my own journey. I started, teaching just because I had information. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Yeah. And I'll admit that if anyone took courses I started teaching about 8-9 years ago, it was just, here's information.
Yeah.
And even now too, you're starting you're starting to teach and you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I used to teach that way. I can't believe I used to say those things. I can't
Hmm.
believe that's how I thought people were going to get this information.
Yeah.
You can't just vomit knowledge on people. You have to get them to engage with it. And
Yeah,
that's the art, isn't it?
it is. And what's fascinating to me about this is that, we look at we teach oftentimes the way we were taught. And this goes back to not just in massage therapy school, but of course through, our own elementary and secondary education systems, which is primarily about one person transmitting information to a large group of people. And it is, at least based on the way the traditional classroom has been set up for the last couple hundred years, one pace fits all and one activity, like one person talking, and that's the pace at which the information is presented, and that's the content that gets delivered to everybody in the classroom. But people learn so many different ways and at such different rates and paces, and that idea of I would, be standing in the classroom talking to people and, give them what I thought was some really good, great content, great delivery. And, you say, hey, does anybody have any questions? And nobody raises their hand. So like, good, everybody must get that. And then we go do an activity where I want them to apply what we just learned. And they're looking at me like deer in the headlights. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me of recognizing that they might have heard it the first time. They might even have thought they understood it, but that doesn't mean necessarily it's anchored into a good long-term memory or a good, working memory to be able to be accessed so that they can really do something with it. And that's what kind of spurred me to start looking a lot more at learning science and how people really do learn and what's going to make the most memorable and engaging learning experience for them in the long run.
Have you done education? Like, have you pursued any like kind of graduate education or university education in being an educator?
Not formally. Well, let me back up a little bit. There was some of that stuff in my psychology graduate program because we do talk about learning in the field of psychology. So there was some initial impetus on that. But for me, the vast majority of it has been self-directed learning in exploring about learning outside of the formal educational system.
Yeah, it's as an adult, right? Adult learners, right? I think we don't always realize that, it usually takes experience, but we don't realize that so often when we are teaching, we're teaching like we're teaching kids, right?
Hmm.
You're the
Yeah,
authority figure and you're like just giving information to people. That was the thing that I struggled with was like, how do I change this so I'm not just giving information and engaging? Because everyone's got different learning styles, like you said, different pacing. How do you bring all these things to make it, some people are going to want that auditory, some people are going to want that kinesthetic, some people are going to
hmm,
want to have that discussion, and how do you put that all together into a learning environment so that
yeah,
people like take that information on and they can go to their clinic the next day and try to apply it or think about it, and
yeah,
that's hard. But I
yeah,
would say with you too, a lot of it in my own journey has been, you know learning from people that I learn well from. I mean, what did they do? Why do I gravitate towards this person who's uh, seems to me like their learning style works for me. But also,
yeah.
yeah, like you said, reading the education science and the adult learning principles and be like, what works and what doesn't work for adults, and what works for one person is not going to work for everybody. So we can't
Yeah.
have one singular approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the same way that you emphasize the importance of reading research for our field to make sure that we're doing things that are supported by adequate evidence whenever possible, the same thing really goes true in the learning field of looking at the things that we're doing. And I know some of the early episodes of your podcast here have been focused on myth busting, and this is a good example. There's some of that in the learning world too. I mean, there's some things out there that are just very pervasive ideas that I latched onto early on and just, learned by reading a lot of the research that some of those things just simply aren't true. Like a great example is learning styles. The idea of the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning styles has never been supported by any of the adequate educational research. There are preferences that people have for certain types of learning strategies, but the real key is, are you constructing something in your learning activity that's appropriate for what you're trying to teach? Like, you're not going to teach somebody how to swim with a PowerPoint presentation, despite the fact that it may say, I'm a real visual learner, I need to see pictures or whatever. You can do that, but that's a psychomotor skill, and it's going to need to be taught in a fashion that will be done more kinesthetically. I run into this all the time because I do a lot of online teaching, and I run into students saying, well, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I can't learn online. And so I ask them, okay, can you explain to me how you engage in clinical reasoning and clinical decision making in a kinesthetic process? What's the hands-on way you do that, go through the process of clinical reasoning to identify somebody's pain complaint, for example. So the key is, does that really match what they're really trying to learn? So, um,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up too. Yeah, because I did. Yeah, when we're talking, you're right. It's not style; it's preference, and that's a more correct way of saying it too. Because that's the thing I encountered too is that everyone has this learning. These are the three primary learning styles, and and then you read the research on education, you realize no, those are just preferences. But it's more about how do you, like you said, how do you apply? What are the outcomes? What are the
yeah,
some people use competencies or the skills,
yeah,
for the task.
yeah.
One of the things that I found actually for me as an educator, which I wish I had learned earlier, is because for those people that know me, my real passion actually is I coach soccer. Like I've
Oh,
played my
okay.
whole
Uh-huh.
life. I
Uh-huh.
coach kids, and I'm on the field probably 4 to 6, sometimes 7 days a week. I love it.
Yeah,
Doing my coaching certification, my coaching education for kids, and you can apply the same principles to adults, actually taught me more about being an educator than
I
any
bet. Yeah,
educating, because it's all about like changing behavior or
yeah,
influencing behaviors
yeah,
or and so when I take those principles and you apply them to your classroom when you're teaching and engaging with adults, you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known this a decade ago. This would have
yeah.
made so much easier. But
I agree. Yeah. One of the places that really helped me get that same, and I'm totally on board with you with that whole concept. And one of the places that helped me understand that a great deal is when, again, this had to do with once I started learning a lot more about online education and looking at andragogy versus pedagogy. Pedagogy being that, how do we teach children, but andragogy being how do we teach adults, but also recognizing too, in the learning world, there's sort of a big distinction between academic learning and job or learning, workplace learning. So, for example, in academic learning, we're sort of given, you need to, take these courses, you need to pass these tests, and these are supposedly the educational markers that tell us that you've learned the things you need to do to master this content. Whereas in workplace learning, and this is like a lot of the additional education that you have to do in your job when a new piece of software comes around or a new product comes around. You have to learn how to use it or whatever it is on your job. This is more situational learning about, I just need a smaller chunk of information and a smaller piece of learning, and I need to know how to apply this and use it to make my job better. And so a lot of the focus in that workplace learning environment is a lot more on outcomes of, can this person have a significant behavior change? Exactly what you're talking about with on the soccer field. Can we make a significant improvement or behavior change in this individual when they go through our little educational experience, whatever that happens to be? And certainly, I think in the continuing education world and in the massage field, a lot of what we do is kind of sitting on the fence between both those models. Some of it is an academic course kind of model, but a lot more of it is sort of, we're taking a course to try to do something to learn new skills that may change the behavior we have in our clinic and maybe some of the outcomes with our clients that way.
yeah, it's what we do as massage therapists. I mean, this is a bias I have, or a belief I have, is that is how we are educated primarily in school needs to be updated to be more in line with more the kind of the educational science,
Yeah.
because so much of what we learn in school, and I'm speaking very generalized, very stereotyped here, so listeners, you
Mhm.
can understand I'm not speaking about everything, but I'm speaking about majority. In my experience, is it's very much pattern recognition type learning. We see
Mhm.
this thing, we apply this technique or this strategy, and therefore this is the expected outcome. It doesn't really inspire that critical thinking, you know, perspective as much. Do you agree with that, or can you expand on that?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with it. And I think a lot of that is educators trying, and again, kind of making a distinction between what happens at entry level education versus some of the more advanced education that might be in the continuing education realm. There certainly is a drive at entry level for, this is what you need to do to be able to master the main end goal, which is passing a licensing exam, graduating from your program, training program, and passing a licensing exam. And the goal of passing the licensing exam may not necessarily be in line with the goal of training you to be a really good practitioner, because to be able to pass the licensing exam when you're just new to all this information, you need those black and white categories of like, this is always this way and that's always that way and that's how it's going to be on the test. And as you know, when you get out into the real world, it's pretty darn messy and it doesn't always look like that at all. And you have to be a plug for the podcast here, the thinking practitioner. Okay. You have to be that individual who can think on your feet and be flexible in the way that you look at something, and see it from a completely different perspective. And that takes a whole different type of learning and a whole different type of understanding, I think.
Oh, I would agree with you there. Do you see there being a place though in the kind of entry level education where where learners could be given, I don't know, maybe more curiosity or more exploratory ways, so things aren't that like, black and white, yes
Yeah,
and no.
I think absolutely. And again, this is kind of like, at least my perspective through my distorted lens of viewing those things. A lot of possibilities are on the horizon for how education may change, and I think a lot of that is going to be driven by the capabilities of what we can do with online education, for example, when it is done well. And just to give you an example, this kind of goes back to something that you were saying a second ago. There's this thing called the Rip Van Winkle complex. I don't know if you ever heard that, but the story,
Never heard that.
the old story about Rip Van Winkle. He falls asleep for 20 years and he wakes up and the world around him is all different and changed and all that kind of stuff. So the way that story goes in the education world is, Rip Van Winkle falls asleep for 200 years, and 200 years ago, falls asleep, wakes up in the modern era, looks around, and he is just absolutely stunned. There are these, things flying through the sky. There's people talking to things in their hands and devices and seeing pictures on the screen of all this kind of stuff. His whole world is completely unfamiliar to him. And then he walks into a school building and he goes, I know what this is. This is a school. It looks exactly like it did back in my day, you know? And that's the thing. It really hasn't changed that much. And it's really that whole idea of how do we do something different with education so that, for example, instead of it being that walk into the classroom, teacher talks to us, gives us information, and it's just one pace and one content tub for everybody, there's a way to personalize learning so that, and in massage school, for example, this would be so relevant because we have people coming into massage school just out of high school. We have people who are mid-career life changers who had some healthcare professions work in their background. Those people shouldn't be in the same class doing the same things with each other. There should be a way to personalize their learning experience so that they can, push themselves where they are and do that in a different way. And the ability for online education to personalize that experience based on where you are at a certain time is a whole lot more engaging and has a lot more potential than the traditional model that we have with just one teacher in front of the classroom having to give something to everybody that's the same.
I always wanted, to when I was in massage school, you kind of wanted to be given the answers, right? Because that's what you thought you needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that what you learned in massage school is just, yeah, they're teaching you, like you said, to pass an exam.
Yeah.
Then you go into the real world and the learning occurs when you are out with working with clients, and you realize that everything I learned in school really just taught me not, I never felt like I really was taught what I needed to know to be
Mm-hmm.
an effective clinician. And a lot of this came, a lot of the learning I had to do was more so I had to undo. And you talked about it earlier about the myth
Yes.
busting stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like use this as a segue into that conversation. Uh, do you find that there is a lot of value in myth busting? Like, it's something that we see so much of, and it creates so much debate and so much argument and so much finger pointing. For me, as a learner, as an educator, I find that I find it very difficult for people to take on new information that might be less wrong unless we
Mm-hmm.
get rid of the old stuff. or
Yeah.
put the old stuff in its place. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
It's always a tricky one with folks because I think, you want to have some degree of solidity and some degree of foundation underneath you before the rug gets jerked out from under you, which it often does in some of these kinds of things. And we have this sense of wanting to know that where we started and what was the thing going on for us at the beginning had some degree of accuracy and validity to it. But where I see the big challenge and problem for us is that massage therapy currently is something that evolves out of a lineage model of education as opposed to more of an academic model in a lot of the other healthcare professions. So what I'm speaking about here with the lineage model is that, a lot of the training was established because so and so started a massage school and they taught some students, and then the students came and taught in that school and they learned from that teacher, and like a lot of it goes back to an individual, a guru or a figurehead of some kind as the one who really has the wealth of wisdom around all these sorts of things. And so that's particularly difficult, I think, to have that kind of challenging the information or challenging the norms or whatever when you have that kind of lineage model, because it gets personal for people. Like, how dare you question my teacher kind of thing, or this is the kind of thing that I learned. So but I think in terms of for growth and for advancement and for the future of our profession, we have to be able to do that. We have to learn how to do that. And we have to be able to extract the academic debate from the personal attack. And that's where we have a hard time right now, it seems like, especially on social media. you know.
And we see it all the time.
Yeah.
And this is what I don't know about. I'll speak for myself, but I used, with kind of Facebook and social media, when that kind of started to explode in the 2010s ish, maybe around then, there was so much. You go on any of the massage therapy Facebook groups, and there was people fighting and people arguing and, just throwing research, and they always were these personal attacks. It was, or someone would try to make an academic argument, and then someone would take it as a personal attack.
Yeah.
And that is really, after watching, observing, and guilty of engaging in those, sometimes you realize that you're not moving the needle anywhere. You're pushing people further away from that healthy debate. So now I don't even engage in stuff. Like, I'll see people post stuff which is, I know is just belief. It's faith based.
Yeah.
Like you said, I love that, the lineage model of education. I've never heard that before, but I love that. You got that head, the guru, or that figurehead at the top, where you have a leader, and everyone follows underneath that. I think that's so true. But when the science doesn't support what that person says, people will often go, like, based on their emotions rather than logic, and that is it's so unhealthy, because it really does prevent us from moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and again, because we are so influenced by the climate and the environment in which we live, we are clearly living in a far more polarized kind of social climate now than we used to. And it's just not okay to be wrong. It's just like, and that's become a real problem, is that some people feel like it makes you less than, or it makes you, somehow or other less qualified if you say you're wrong about something, or if somebody says, this is inaccurate, and people get just, highly protective about that whole thing. And that's so difficult. That's really so difficult to do. And I tell people at the beginning of all my classes, that I said, this is a ground rule for this class. You have to question authority, and that means if I say something that goes counter to something that you believe, you got to call me on it. Number one, because I might be wrong about something, and I might have said something wrong. I want to correct that. But this is how we engage in the academic learning process and grow ourselves as clinical reasoning practitioners, is being able to think through different points of view about stuff. So it's a hard mold to get out of, and especially in an educational environment like that. But very needed, I think.
For sure. And to have that humility, and to be humble as an educator, say, I don't have all the answers.
Mhm.
If you don't like what I'm having to say, or you want to challenge me, please challenge me, because I'm not the figurehead that knows everything.
Yeah.
I have stuff that I'm comfortable with my knowledge, but maybe you have a different perspective, or maybe you have something to challenge it. Just say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say the majority of CE instructors that I have encountered in my life don't have that. They're like, nope, don't question me. This is
Yeah.
this is the information,
Yeah.
and I find that's not conducive to open learning or to critical thinking.
No, and that's one of the reasons that I say that to people in the class is because I think that's been their experience in a lot of other places is that, they encounter people who have, I don't know if that's just, the sense of insecurity on the part of the instructors or just feeling like they have to defend a certain, modalities perspective or something like that. But yeah, I think that's been a lot of people's perspective. And I've certainly encountered that as a student in classes over the years as well of teachers not being so receptive to alternative viewpoints and things that might challenge the model that's being presented sometimes.
One thing I often, or almost always, will say to people is that, all opinions are welcome. Like, there's no, like, let's have lots of questions, lots of discussion. I said, but strong claims require strong evidence. So if you have something you feel very strongly about, you have to be able to defend it with
Yeah.
evidence. Otherwise, it's just an opinion, which is totally fine. We all have them.
Mhm.
But and what I have found in those cases is that people don't have, even though they have strong opinions, there's not often a lot of evidence to support that. It's, well, I took this course, or in my clinical experience, it's
Yeah.
this.
Mhm.
And it always comes to the conversation of like, well, I'm never ever going to question your clinical experience. I'm never going to question your outcomes you're getting with people that come to see you, because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ideas, and
Yeah.
those ideas need to be defended.
Mhm.
And more often than not, particularly if people are coming from a modality empire,
Yeah.
like an acronym based kind of way of thinking, it's that the figurehead, that lineage model. And
Yeah.
that becomes, when people realize, I found that when people realize that, okay, I actually don't have any evidence to support this other than my clinical experience, maybe I can take on a different understanding for why it's working than the one I've been given. And that's
Mhm.
why I've found that real learning can occur, to kind of reconceptualize, maybe you're not releasing this thing, or you're not doing what you've been taught, but you're still getting an outcome. But the difference, the explanation is different.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
why it's important to be less wrong.
Yeah. And the whole modality empire thing that you mentioned, there's an interesting, I think, sort of double-edged sword and dichotomy about that, which is those sort of modality empire perspectives and ideas are really valuable for a certain thing, which is they're valuable to hook you as an interest in. This gives you a framework to start looking at something and a way to organize your understanding of something, of maybe that is a way to work in a completely different kind of method than you've used before, or to have a way to look at things in this whole organizational perspective, so that you can organize the content, the information, the large amount of ideas or perspectives that are coming across as something. But, and this is the but for the end of it, there comes a point when you need to know how to let go of that as well. You need to know how to recognize that there's going to be times when this particular model may or may not necessarily fit the same any longer, or it might there may be things that come up in research that will challenge some of the fundamental principles of it, and you have to be okay with letting go at that time. And that's often the place, I think, where a lot of people get stuck, is they can definitely jump into it and get hooked by it, and it does its job of really getting your interest peaked and getting you excited about wanting to do something different. But then you get hooked in the framework of it, and unable to extricate yourself from that.
That's such a great point there, Whitney. I'm glad you expanded on that. When I was early in my career, I was totally into like the whole fascia craze, and I was into like structural integration and stuff. And then everything I saw was a fascial problem.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so everything I saw was, there's some type of structural imbalance or something that needed to be corrected. And what I found was, it moved the focus away from the person and more towards that fixing mindset of like, if you come in for these series of treatments, I'm going to do this thing and you're going to feel better. And then when
Hmm.
people didn't feel better, I was left without any answers. I was like,
Yeah.
maybe you just need more treatments.
Yeah.
And it really resulted in this, like, you're stuck, because you're only thinking one way. And then I started attributing all my successes as me releasing or fixing or creating this balance. And now, you take a jump into the pain science stuff, and it all swings you almost to the complete other direction, because you're like you're there these. At the time, I felt there were these two polar things, but then, over time we learn and we start to realize that, okay, like, I don't believe I'm releasing fascia because I've never seen evidence that says you can do that. But I know that when I do these techniques on people in this way, sometimes people feel better.
Yeah.
And maybe they feel better because of more of these interactions that we're having, which can be explained by the pain science stuff. So yeah, there's an integration of it that I think is really important. But I like what you said, is that when we think just in this one particular model, we're too close-minded because we think only one way. We have our blinders on.
Yeah. It's just that it's that saying that if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And if it's, if that's the way you look at things, then that'll be the lens through which you practice a lot of times. So.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. That's very true. So you've been a CE instructor for a long time. When did you start teaching?
I started teaching entry-level education in 1989, and I, did the same thing that you did, which is like shudder when I think of the people who had to be exposed to me in class, because I was only a year out of massage school, and this is the way it works very often. And I had been working as a teaching assistant at our school, and a curriculum director said, I'm gonna give you a class now. I want you to teach this particular class. And I said, I'm not ready. And she said, oh, yes, you are. You're on the schedule. This is when you need to start doing it. And so I really had to kind of ramp up my efforts to try to be a much better teacher in there. I also had another thing working against me that I laugh a bit about, but I think it helped me along a lot, which is that I have always looked very young for my age. And I was at that time, let me think, probably about 27 or so, something like that. And I'm serious, I looked like I was about 17 or 18 years old. I really looked like a young kid. And then in massage school, this is, back in the late 1980s, there was a pretty good percentage of the people that were coming in as mid-career changers who had been doing something else in their life, and they came into massage school. And so I was having to teach a lot of these people significantly older than me. And like, I walk in and everybody's like, who's this kid, and what's he doing here? And I recognized the only way I was ever going to get any kind of respect from any of the students was I better really know my shit very well. And so I really put a whole lot of effort into making sure I really knew what I was doing, inside and out. And so I taught entry-level education for a few years, and then I got hooked up with Benny Vaughn, who was a sports massage icon really in our country here, and a bit around the world as well, and got a fortunate opportunity to work with him a good bit early on in the early 90s, and then started teaching some continuing education courses with him, and then eventually went out on my own around 1994 or 5, something like that. Started teaching some of my own stuff at that time.
Wow. And so obviously back then there wouldn't have been basically online or self-directed stuff, but you were teaching just live courses?
All live courses. Yep. It was all workshop stuff. I had produced some very, very rudimentary training materials about orthopedic assessment for massage therapists, because it was something I thought was grossly missing in a lot of the continuing education courses. Everybody was teaching all kinds of treatment strategies and treatment methods, and do this kind of technique and that kind of technique. And nobody was doing anything about, like, how do you even figure out what the nature of somebody's problem is so that you know what you're supposed to be doing. So I had produced some very embarrassingly rudimentary orthopedic assessment manuals at that time, and that's kind of what I started teaching in a lot of those workshops, was a lot of assessment stuff first, and then that kind of morphed into different things over the years as well.
Right. Yeah, because you have some textbooks and stuff out there, don't you?
Yeah, so eventually that manual eventually moved into a much more reasonable book that I self-published in the early, or actually mid 1990s, called Orthopedic Assessment in Massage Therapy. And then I did another book that was mainly about treatment, called Orthopedic Massage Theory and Technique, and that was done for Elsevier, the big medical book publisher. And also, this was late 90s, early 2000s when that one first came out.
Nice. Now, do you still teach like live in-person courses, or is all your stuff you doing online now?
No, I'm still doing some live courses. I was kind of off the road, well, like all of us were off the road during the pandemic for a while, and I was trying to cut back on a lot of the in-person courses because I had been doing, a couple weekends a month for, 15, 20 years or something. It's been a long time I've been doing that sort of thing. So I was really kind of burned out. So definitely took some time off, but I have been back on the road doing some more teaching now. Again, as a matter of fact, I was just teaching last weekend and a couple weekends before, and I got something else come up the next couple weekends. So a few things back on the road again. And I love being in the classroom, or that aspect of sharing things with people in a live environment, getting questions to come up and seeing the light bulbs go off with people and all that kind of thing. So there's some of those things that just can't be replaced in an in-person class that are really valuable for getting great learning experiences happening. But I also have recognized there's a lot of things that I cannot do in the classroom anywhere near as well as I can do them in an online environment. So each thing has its benefits for sure.
What kind of things would you say are better for online that you can't get in person?
What I think are really better is a lot of the deeper sort of clinical reasoning principles and processes. So, for example, I can't teach good clinical reasoning in a 2-day weekend workshop. What we can do is we can give a lot of content, and really that environment should be spent more doing things like psychomotor skill training, where you can give feedback on movement things and techniques and things like that. But when it comes to the process of figuring things out through, the clinical reasoning and sort of the assessment process and things like that, which involves making mistakes, changing and correcting those mistakes, and then going down a different path. Like, I think this might be what's happening here. And then, oh, wait a minute, but that's not consistent here. Maybe that's not what it is. I should go back and do something else and go down another path. I certainly have found that building some more complex branching scenario um, activities, learning activities in the online environment is a great way to do that kind of thing, where people get to personally explore the process of making certain decisions and seeing the outcomes of those decisions. Either this was positive or this was negative. Oh, I got to back up and do something different. That's how you train clinical reasoning. And you just can't do that in a classroom with a large group of people, because it's a very highly individualized process, and secondly, you can't make those decisions happen for everybody. There's no way you can do that kind of thing in the time that it takes to do it in the classroom.
One thing stupid joke I always make. I make anyone that takes my courses. I make stupid jokes all weekend just because, whatever. I just try not to be too boring, and just my sense of humor is stupid. But one of the jokes I always make is that I always say, like, the most unevidence-based way to teach adults is to give you a bunch of information in 2 days.
Yeah, right.
Because it's ridiculous. Because I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, like, really, like, by the time you've hit like lunchtime, and you come back after lunch, everyone's tired, and usually you've started early. There's not a lot of real good learning occurs. And so maybe you get like 2 half days of like where people can be engaged just in the morning. But then by the time afternoon comes, people want to go, they're tired, they've been sitting there all day. Even if you have them doing stuff, it's still, they're in a classroom. I always find it's such a hard way to educate people. And that's where I like the online stuff, is like the self-directed online stuff, is that it's a good way to give people information.
Yeah.
But then if you could do it, like, I think the best way would be a hybrid where people come, where they take your online stuff and, like, here's all this information, and here's some things for you to work through and think about. And then the classroom is where you can really apply, like I said, those psychomotor skills, or those problem solving things based on people in front of you.
Yeah. And what you're saying has certainly been my experience too, exactly, which is that, I mean, there is the learning science principle around this, which we call cognitive load. And that is, that's what happens in a classroom. You just can only take in so much amount of information and process that effectively. And you just can't do that very well for 8 hours a day, days in a row like that on the sort of weekend workshop format. So that's one of the logistical challenges. And the beauty of online education is doing what we call chunking, in very small chunks of information or content or things like that, that people can intersperse with their life. Like, I just had a client cancel. Hey, let me hop online and do a quick little module here while I do this. That actually enhances your learning, believe it or not, even better, because it's separated apart from other things that you're doing. And this is sort of the process of interspersing that learning with other activities actually makes it anchor more effectively. So that's again one of the things that I love about that particular environment. But then, coming together as a group in the classroom lets you be able to talk with other people, exchange ideas, certainly feel things that you're trying to do and teaching a manual skill or something like that. So yeah, like we said, there's things that work best in both environments.
Yeah, I try to keep my online ones like maybe between 5 and 15 minutes long for like the chunking aspect. Or like watch a video and then do something else.
Yeah,
And that video is on something very specific.
yeah,
And that's because what I've found is that teaching like a weekend course, right? You can give people all kinds of information. Like you said, the cognitive load, right? There's only so much they can handle, and people will take your course and they're like, "Oh, you get good feedback, hopefully," and they're like, "This is going to change my practice." And you hear all these wonderful things. You're like, "Yes, I nailed it. I did such a good job, helping these people learn this weekend." And then they'll send you a question a couple weeks later, or you'll see them post something online that is like, I'm like, "You just took my course. That was a key thing I wanted you to
that's
learn."
right. Yeah,
And it didn't land, and then I never blame them. I'm like, I'm a shitty instructor.
hmm
I was like, I must have not have emphasized that enough.
yeah,
Uh, and whereas the online stuff, you're like, hopefully, because they don't just power through, 10 hours, 20 hours of content.
yeah.
They'll build those chunks, and it'll resonate enough time to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and another great example of that is I've seen this happen. It took me a while to kind of get and understand what was really happening here. And it wasn't until, again, I started studying learning science that I realized this. And I'm sure, had this kind of thing happen where, let's say you're teaching something in a class, in a physical classroom, and you're teaching, maybe a complex topic about something, and you're going through this content and you think you're being really clear with the explanation, everything like that, and going through piece by piece. And then you say something, really pertinent and relevant, and then you start to move on to something else. Student raises their hand and say, "Hey, what about so and so?" And which is what you just got through saying a moment ago. And everybody looks around at that person. It's just like, "What's wrong with you? Weren't you listening? He just said that." And they don't realize that student, it's not that that student was not paying attention. They were so busy writing down what you said right before that. They were writing down and mentally processing what they were writing. And so they did not hear you. And a lot of times we don't think about the fact that you can't have both those channels working, where you can write and see and pay attention to what you're writing and also listen appropriately at the same time and take stuff in. So everybody who's sitting there copiously writing notes in a classroom, I can promise you they're missing a lot of stuff that you're saying, even though they look like they're engaged, and they are engaged with what you're doing, what you're talking about. But that's, again, one of the things that makes the capability in an online class to stop a presentation, write something down, rewind, pause, go back, hear it again. Wait a minute, what was that? I did not get that. Let me go back and do that.
Yeah.
Wish we could do that in the classroom, but we can't. But this is the one thing I would say to teachers out there, is that remember that a lot of people who are looking like they're really engaged, and they're busy writing things down. They're missing half of what you say because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Every time I see people writing in a classroom, I almost always will pause and just kind of wait if I notice it, because they're that they're not listening.
Yeah.
Well, they are, but they're not. They might miss something because they're trying to catch up with what you said before.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I learned from just some of the adult education stuff I had been learning about was, some of the danger of like giving people like notes packages before you teach,
hmm
because then oftentimes people they'll just read through it and
Yeah.
not listen to what you're saying, so that way they're reading and not hearing, and they're those competing messages just get
Yeah.
lost.
Right. And there is absolute artistry to the way that a lot of those things are often presented in the classroom too. I mean, I was like everybody else when PowerPoint came out. It's just like, oh, this is great. You put all this content on the screen, you can start talking about this. And years later, I and the guy's name is going to skip me now, but he wrote this book called Presentation Zen. You ever read that book?
No,
Or
no, but I
get
want to
it.
now.
It's an absolute wonderful book. It's about how to create an engaging visual presentation. And one of the main themes out of that book is get all your text off the screen as much as you can when you're doing presentations, because when you put that text up on the screen, people are going to be reading it. And just like the person who's writing the note, they're not going to be listening as much to what you say. The purpose of your visual aid is to enhance what you're talking about and what you're showing and what you're doing to people. But you want them to listen to the words through the auditory channel of what you're doing. And when somebody reads something, it also engages the auditory channel because they're reading and saying those things in their head. So that auditory channel is also somewhat blocked from being able to do that. And I was doing a presentation for one of the teachers' conferences here a number of years ago, and I was talking about cognitive load and putting text on the screen. I put this, in the middle of my presentation, put this PowerPoint slide up on the screen that had a whole bunch of text on it. And, I waited till I knew people were about halfway through reading the text, and I said, "Stop." I said, "Somebody tell me what I just said." And it's like everybody's looking around like, "Oh, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear what did he just say? What did he just say?" And it's like, see, that's exactly what happens when you put slides up on the screen with tons of text on it. People are reading because they think that's what's important, and they're not listening to what you say.
I that always drives me crazy at conferences, where you go and watch and these really smart people,
Yeah,
but it's just so much text and they're talking and you want
yeah,
to read it, and even if you try not to read it, your eye, at least for me, my eyes get attracted to the text, and
yeah.
you miss stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I
I will say this, and this is a probably blatantly inappropriate statement to say, but scientists are the worst presenters that I have encountered. They just, you know, great at getting data and putting that stuff together, but they, as a general group, they tend to be really bad at presenting that stuff in terms of getting it up there, putting visuals across to it, because they just information dump onto the PowerPoint slides and just give content in
yeah,
those kind of environments.
that's not a good way to learn, and it's
Yeah.
it's a good way to put your audience to sleep too, unless they're really engaging,
Yeah.
but usually they're not. There's
Yeah.
very few that are. Because you've been to like we met briefly, or I met you at the San Diego Pain Summit
Yeah.
probably, I don't know,
Couple years
16,
ago,
17.
17, I think it was 17. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I enjoy it there, and I enjoy the people, and I enjoy the content. But one thing I learned very quickly after my first year there, which I think was 2015, was I can't sit through a full day in that conference,
Mm-hmm.
or any conference I attend to, because it's just
Yeah.
the cognitive load. There's just so much information.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming.
It is. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
conference format is more of a social thing, I think, than a learning thing, because
Yeah.
it's hard to learn all that stuff. And
It is absolutely. It's just there's no way to kind of really process that. And a lot of this again is, there's a certain aspect that is important in information delivery, but until that gets anchored and used in a way that you can really apply those things, they just are not likely to stick very long.
I know, we know Justin. I know Justin Kobe
Hmm.
Solis, who I
Yeah.
know you're friends with as well. He was telling me some great things about your online kind of self-directed courses. Just tell us a little bit. I'm curious to hear about like how you structure them, and how you go about them, because I know they're quite heavy. Like they're like a big,
Yeah.
engaging learning thing. Tell me a little more about
Yeah,
those.
they are. So again, this kind of like goes back to historically of sort of learning a lot more about how to construct online education and how to instruct online courses. That started for me back in the early 2000s was when I first started working on this stuff. And the software for online education was pretty rudimentary at that point too, in terms of what things looked like. But you know, I say this to people a lot of times, and this is kind of indicative of the issue and both the problem, which is it's really easy to create online courses and it's really hard to create good online courses. And we've technically made it very easy, for example, just to put videos up or put PDF documents up on the line or something like that and call it a course, which is what a lot of people do. And quite honestly, there's just a lot of really substandard online education I think, not only in our profession, but across the board in many different professions, just because it's so easy to do that. But what I really wanted to do was to do something that was going to be a lot more engaging. And so that required the learning a lot more about what are called the authoring tools. So what an authoring tool is these are the software tools that we use to build certain types of online experiences. So instead of just having content delivery through something like a video or a PDF file or something like that, an authoring tool might allow you to build let's say like an online scenario where, let's say you got a clinical problem that you want to get people to have an experience with, and you build this little thing, and you might put characters on the screen or something like that. But in a scenario, you usually give them a question or some kind of thing that they're going to have to solve, and they have choices of, am I going to take choice A, choice B, or choice C? And then they click on one of those choices, and choice A will take them down one path, choice B will take them down another path, and choice C will take them down a third path. And usually one path is correct and the other two are incorrect, but they might get quite a ways down those incorrect paths before they realize that this is not really, oh, I made a mistake here. This is not something that's going to work out. Like, I chose to treat this kind of thing, and really this is something that's a contraindication. I shouldn't be doing this. So you're training them on the exact kinds of things that happen in the clinical environment. But these kinds of learning experiences can be pretty darn complex to build, because just a few minute long scenario could take quite a number of screens and images and things like that to create and produce. So they're very, very time consuming to create on the front end, but they really are very robust learning experiences later on. So I really like to try to focus on very kind of a mixture of different learning experiences that have people answering questions, retrieving knowledge, putting things together that they learned in previous portions, but interacting with what they're doing on the computer, and just sort of, instead of just sort of passively sitting there and watching or reading things.
Wow. Yeah, it's a way different experience than I've had doing online courses, being able to have those authoring tools to kind of go through scenarios. I think it's more realistic.
Yeah.
Which you're not going to get in a lot of, and most of the other online learning software or course-based software. Because most of the stuff that they do online, at least, and with the stuff that I do as well, a lot of times it's PDFs, it's videos, it's questions, it's like downloads, it's workbooks. But being able to actually choose a scenario and then follow that through a reasoning process is not something that I have seen in any of the online course builders that I've played with.
Yeah, and that's, again, this is a lot to do with the software applications themselves, is that these authoring tools aren't cheap, and the course learning platforms, such as just the Thinkific, Teachable, the various different course authoring platforms out there have built some types of learning tools into their platform that make it easy for you to upload video, to upload PDFs and Word documents, create multiple choice tests, and those kinds of things they're pretty standard sort of processes. So a lot of people don't even realize that there's more to what can be built than just that kind of stuff of putting content out there. And so when you're working with these authoring tools, there's a much steeper learning curve in learning how to use them and how to use them effectively for a good kind of learning experience. And as I said, because it takes so much longer to build these kind of learning things, oftentimes a lot of people just don't want to get into that.
Right. Except for you.
Yeah, right. Except for us crazy people who are geeking out on it and think like, oh man, we could do all kinds of things with this. But yeah, you buried in the weeds a good bit too.
For sure. What software do you use? What do you have it embedded in your website, a learning management system?
Yeah, so the learning management system is essentially the shell that holds the learning activities. And so we are getting ready to move to a different learning management system, but the learning management system holds the learning activities that are built in the authoring tools. So there's two main authoring tools that I use mostly right now. They're both from a company called Articulate, and one is called Rise, and it's kind of a web-based application or a web-based interface that is designed to make it really easy to make very mobile-friendly learning activities that'll work good on all different kinds of devices and things like that. So it's a really kind of a quick and easy web builder process for coursework, but it doesn't really handle things like those complex branching scenarios very well. those are built in another tool called Storyline. So, and again, Articulate is the company that produces them. Storyline is kind of like the Cadillac and granddaddy of all of the authoring tools. There's 2 or 3 big authoring tools. If you look in the sort of the online learning community, I think the probably somewhere around 75% of the people who are building significant online web content, especially in the corporate environment, are using, and with authoring tools, or most about 75% of them are probably using Storyline
Oh, cool. I've never
for
heard of
doing
that
those
before.
kinds of things.
Curious to
Yeah,
pique
yeah.
my interest.
So
I to look into
there
that.
are, I think you can get a free trial for like a month or something like that to play around with it and do it, because it's expensive. It's, close to $1,000 a year. So it's not a one-time purchase. It's a subscription thing, but that's because they have all kinds of robust libraries of resources that you get access to, and it gives you a whole bunch of other things that are helpful once you learn about how you might use that authoring environment more effectively for it.
And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize too. When you do have online content out there, it's really freaking expensive to operate those things. With this,
Yeah,
because they're all subscription based, and depending on what you use, sometimes there's content maximums, how much you can upload, and how much you can
yeah.
add. And then if you want to build landing pages and sales pages and blah blah blah, it can be thousands and thousands of dollars a year.
Oh,
Each.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Very well aware of that. We keep looking like, what can we get rid of, to try to cut these costs down. But, the systems are so enmeshed, from the CRM to the graphic software to the e-commerce platforms to purchase the courses to the authoring tools to build it, to the LMS hosting and the website hosting. Yet all these kind of things, it's ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching after a while, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what most people pay, but I would say, yeah, like I would say if you can do all that for less than $5,000, you're probably doing okay.
Yeah.
'Cause it's probably
$5,000 a year or a month?
a year, well, a year,
Yeah.
would be, I mean, you could do $5,000 a month depending on your volume,
That's right.
but I
Yeah.
would say that it adds, it's a lot of money, and
Yeah.
people don't
I
realize it. They're like,
If
well,
you
this
can
is
do that
ridiculous.
stuff for $5,000 a year, you're doing really good. That's what
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I think I was just saying that got the cheapest, right? If you wanted
Right.
the base model of everything without all the extra trim and extra
Yeah.
bling and stuff, yeah, it's very
Yeah.
expensive. So
And also, like, what you're saying is absolutely true, which is, like, for example, if you're just starting out doing something, you don't need a lot of these things that are based on certain volumes
yeah,
of, like, you can make a CRM work out of Google Sheets and Gmail and a couple other things like that, or you can make some other kinds of things until you get to a certain size, or like, a free MailChimp account, and all these things. You can tie a bunch of tools together that don't cost a lot, but when you get to a certain volume of things, stuff starts breaking when you have all these things cobbled together, and you realize, like, I need a system that's really designed to do this correctly.
right. Rather than a bunch of things that, yeah, you
Yeah.
just like copy and paste and put it together and try and make it work. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that having online stuff in Canada, which puts me at a disadvantage, or people like myself, and I'm not the only one, is that everything we have to pay is in American funds.
Yeah.
So you all of a
Yep.
sudden got that 30 to, I don't know, what's in 35% extra. So
Right.
like a Mailchimp
Yeah.
account, which is $100 US a month, or whatever, is
Yeah.
actually, it's 135 Canadian, and Thinkific, which is like $1,500 a year American. These kind of
Yeah.
things, and then
Exactly. Yep.
all the
Yeah.
CRM and stuff, it just adds up. So
Yeah.
but it's valuable though. I mean, it sounds like your courses are great, and I've heard great things about them. Are you still seeing a demand for them kind of post COVID? Or are you feeling that people are kind of online learning fatigued right now?
Well, if I were to look at what's happened in our business in terms of just looking at the numbers, I would have to say there's been a very significant online learning fatigue, at least from the acceptance of what we've seen in a lot of our courses. And we've tried to look at, well, how do we need to rebuild them and do things to make them more interesting and engaging for folks? And, like, what do people really want? What are people looking for? But I do think there definitely is some degree of online learning fatigue that's affecting a lot of stuff in the online education space. But again, that's, for me, always a driving factor by trying to make more interesting and more engaging learning experiences for people.
One of the business lessons I learned was, that when things are good, you don't innovate.
Hmm.
You just kind of
Yeah.
like, hey, things are great. And then when things are like, oh, what's happening? That's
Yeah.
when like your creativity and innovation
Yeah.
comes out,
That's a
and
good idea. Yeah. Yeah.
the evolution needs to occur. And
Yeah.
I would say my experience is the same too. I mean, putting out Con Ed stuff online was it was great. Like everyone wanted it because everyone was, at least here, like people were kind of just learning online for the first time in our industry. There
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of stuff out there. But then yeah, you see people. I think there's that fatigue. They're like, yeah, I've been in front of my computer for 3 years.
Hmm.
Can I
Right.
go and enjoy nature again? I'm allowed to go in public and do things. And so
Yeah.
I am seeing a little bit more of an uptick in interest in person stuff, which the last 3 years people didn't really. It was hard to get people together in a group because of
Exactly. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
COVID
Exactly. Yeah.
situation. Yeah. So what do you feel though? Like, do you think that people will come back? I mean, because you've had this successful online business for a while. Do you feel that this is just the way things are right now? But do you feel that long term there's still that?
What I think is that I've lost confidence in my ability to predict the future. That's what I think.
Very honest.
Because, you know, for so many years, I've watched a lot of trends happening, and I've felt pretty confident, kind of like, you're whitewater rafting, and you kind of like looking down the river and you're seeing where the rocks are and where the rapids are. And, I felt pretty confident in being able to chart a course and chart a path. And now I feel like I'm just going around a bend and there's a giant waterfall. It's just like I really have no idea where it's going to go, and it's just very uncertain. So I'll just have to wait and see what happens with it all. It just seems like a really, and this is not just with online courses. I just think there's a lot of things going on right now that we just don't know how it's going to pan out and how it's going to change. Will it go back to the way it was, or will things just be permanently changed? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm not really sure either what people are looking for.
Hmm.
Sometimes I see, you always look out there and you see what other people are doing and what's working, what's not working. And I know that a lot of CE instructors right now aren't getting the same numbers they were before. And,
Hmm.
and something that I wanted to ask you about was, you know, the CE industry, and then the continuing competencies and continuing education or professional development, whatever terminology you want to use. Every massage therapist anywhere has to have some type of continuing education that they have to require, a quality assurance thing. But do you see massage therapists as doing the bare minimum just to get their requirements, to get, I need this many hours or this many credits? Or do you see that a lot of massage therapists like just wanting to go over, like just do stuff because they want to learn?
Yeah, I think it's for me. I've recognized that I can't speak of massage therapists as a group like that, because there's really both of those things in there. We have a lot of people that come to our courses that I know really want to learn stuff, and then from a business perspective, a lot of times we'll try to schedule a course in a state near their time frame where their CE requirements are due, because we know to get enough people in there to fill the course, I've got to have some of those other folks in there who are just trying to meet the requirements. And that's all they really want to do. And I can often tell in the classroom who those people are too, because they're not often as engaged or as enthusiastic about the learning process. So, um, but certainly in our online courses, we don't get very many of those people who are just there for just to meet their CE credits, because the courses are just too thorough and comprehensive. There's so many other ways to get easy, quick online courses if you just want to get your numbers met. So, but I would like to, my goal is to also start trying to produce some other very short course elements for some of those people who might just be feeling like they want to get those requirements met, but they've heard something about what we're doing. They're kind of interested in it, but they just want to stick their toe in the water. They're not sure they want to do it yet. Um, and some of those people might, get a taste of something and decide, like, I think I'm getting kind of into this. I think I might want to look into it further and do something a little bit more in depth. So I think it really absolutely runs the gamut, because I also have, a lot of people that will come through both physical courses and some of the online stuff who have, twice or three times as many credits as they need for their licensure requirements, but they're doing this because they really want to learn stuff.
Yeah, as an educator, those are always the ones that you're like, you love those people because they just want to learn. They have a million
Yeah.
questions, they have a million things to share. They're so engaged. And yeah, I mean, that was kind of a loaded question because I asked you initially because yeah, you do get both, right? You get
Yeah.
people that are just like, and as an educator, you never really you can't. I mean, everyone has their own experience. I mean, time, money, maybe you live in a remote area and you just like you can't take courses and you need the credits because you still want to work.
Mm.
I totally get that. And so you do get a lot of it. But I would preferably, I guess goes to the question of our massage therapists, do we want to be a healthcare profession or do we want to be a service provider? And I would always like to think that, if we want to view ourselves as a healthcare profession, minimum credit requirements, it should be your goal should be like, how can I best learn to serve the people that come to see me? In which case you should take stuff that interests you and whether it's credits or not.
Mm.
And that's I don't know if that's something you can speak to at all.
Well, I've grappled with that dilemma for a couple of decades, doing different types of things, working with the National Certification Board here in the United States on credentialing issues and things like that with their national certification program, and trying to look at, is there some type of advanced credentialing that we might engage in that would maybe make distinctions between these two different tracks, the track of sort of personal wellness massage and that track of massage as a healthcare profession. And again, just like the previous thing that we were talking about, I don't think there's any way to talk about massage therapists as a general rule with that concept, because there are clearly those that just want to be working in a personal wellness environment, and there are those that definitely just want to be working in a healthcare environment. And what I find interesting about this from an education perspective is I think we've been doing a pretty good job of educating massage therapists to work in the personal care wellness environment in the last couple of decades. I think our schooling does a pretty good job of preparing people to do the things that they need to do for that. And I cannot speak to education in Canada, and I know that's kind of varying depending on which province you're in and everything. But certainly here in the U.S., we are doing a very poor job of training massage therapists to be healthcare professionals, because the entry level training programs just don't go there. They don't go far enough to do that. And so what that does is that means for an individual to get that type of training and skill set and knowledge base that they need to work in that kind of environment has to do that through continuing education courses. And there isn't a set curriculum for that. So you're basically choosing your own courses of what you need to do for learning those kinds of skills to work as a health professional, which is kind of good in that you get to pursue the things that you're interested in, but also very troubling in that you're probably not going to take some things that you really need to take and really need to learn about to be a good healthcare professional that just aren't in your interest area at that point. So that's a challenging place for us right now. And I just, having worked on this issue for, at least 25 years, I don't know that I'm going to see it resolve or change before I'm out of here. It's troubling, but I just don't see the momentum to get that kind of thing addressed. There's too much entrenchment in each of those different camps to do what might need to be done there.
Yeah. It's a stakeholder issue. There's so many different stakeholders involved, and so much, and you have a culture of a profession too, and what do people want, and the schools and the licensing boards. There's a lot of moving pieces that need to kind of come together to decide how are we gonna do this? What's the best path forward?
Yeah.
I like what you said though. I mean that the uh, schools do a good job of teaching like kind of the wellness profession,
Mhm.
and that's the thing that is great about massage, and it depends who you ask, but I feel like you don't have you could go to be a massage therapist, but you don't have to go in this kind of medical route. You could go and
Yeah.
you can go work in a spa, or you can just go work in general wellness relaxation. Super valuable. All of them are valuable. The medical route though is one where I would like to see our profession, at least in Canada, I can speak for us here. would be for us to be a little more integrated in kind of the healthcare system. Because right now we're kind of this like paramedical thing, right? Where,
Yeah.
we help people with pain and movement and rehab stuff, but it's not part of, like, you're not working in hospitals, you're not working in care homes, you're not working in outpatient facilities. You kind of, everyone works in private practice. And I would say that, in order for us here to be more integrated in kind of the full healthcare system, you would need more of that education, that more of that training
Yeah.
specific to those populations that you're going to see.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
one of the places where we run into a big sticking point with that, I think, and it's probably true in both of our countries, is that, there's a lot of people within our profession who say, like, we need to have a degree program for massage to be able to work in that direction. And yet, there are some schools out there that offer degree programs, but the question really becomes, are you actually learning more about massage as a healthcare practice in those degree programs, or are you just having to take other courses that meet an entry level baccalaureate degree, like, English composition and, whatever it is, psychology 101, or one of those things that will help you meet course requirements to meet the number of hours needed for a baccalaureate degree. And if we are going to move into college or university level training programs for massage therapy, I'd want to be pretty sure that people are going to get their money back, because the cost of college is so astronomically ridiculous now that it's putting it out of range for a lot of folks. And the idea that we would move massage therapy training programs into that environment would have to be offset by something like, there's going to be a reasonable return on that investment for those people, and they better stick around in the profession for a while to make that work.
Yeah, in Canada, yeah, there's no degree programs here in Canada. There's a handful of massage schools that are run through like a public university or college, but it's not a degree granting. Like, you go through and it's like you get your diploma, but you don't give you like a baccalaureate degree.
Yeah.
You don't get your bachelor's of science in massage or whatever. And I think the cost difference, so in the States versus Canada for that education is significantly different. It's actually more expensive in Canada to go do your 3 years or 2 years of massage therapy education. They just do a 4-year degree program because the massage colleges here are all privately run.
Right.
They're
Interesting.
very
Yeah.
expensive. Like, I don't know what they cost. I'm going to say about $30,000 it would cost.
Wow.
Whereas you could go and do a 4-year degree, and depending on what part of the country you live in or whatever, your tuition. I mean, I went to school a long time ago. It wasn't that expensive. I did my undergraduate degree, but now you could probably do it for like $20,000.
Wow.
So it would be less,
Yeah.
and I don't know. There's books and stuff on top of that, but
Yeah.
either way, they're both expensive.
Yeah.
I would say the massage therapy education is actually more expensive.
Yeah.
But the problem that you see when it's just with our education in either country, when it's a diploma, competency-based program, is that you go to become a massage therapist. Say you decide you don't want to be a massage therapist anymore, or say you break your arm or you have some health illness, and you don't have anything to fall back on.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a trade, right? So you're trained as a massage therapist. If you don't do massage therapy, your education doesn't,
Yeah.
regardless of how extensive it
Not
is,
easily transferable for
it's not
sure.
transferable to anything else. And so
Yeah.
that's where I would advocate for us as a profession. I would like us to, I would say I would like us to be in a university. I would like it to be a bachelor's degree, because I think it would provide more ability to kind of maneuver or move between different professions. So say you're like, yeah, I was a massage therapist for 10 years, and maybe now I want to be a nurse. So you just go and you could do like 2 years of nursing, because there would be
Yeah.
some overlap with that education.
Right. Yeah.
But I do agree, though, you make a good point that if you're going to get a undergrad degree in massage therapy and you're just filling in the gaps with like all the different courses that you need to take, I would say that's probably not going to give you any better of an education.
Right. Yeah.
It would be great to have more applicable stuff that maybe you would often learn in a continuing education course.
Yeah.
Have that be part of your base education in university.
Yeah. And so our big dilemma that we run into now is, where do we get the qualified teachers to teach those more advanced level skills and abilities in those training programs? Because right now, that's just, I mean, the schools are just scrambling to get teachers just to teach the very basic entry-level training programs. And it takes a lot different skill set for your teachers to teach more of the, things in the healthcare model of massage. And so finding faculty to do that is a big challenge.
Particularly, yeah. So particularly when they don't, we don't have a lot of there's not a lot of highly educated massage therapists out there in terms of like masters, PhDs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing in Canada we might have like 5 PhDs. That's it.
Yeah.
Not a lot. And I don't think any of them are working in the massage world. Or maybe one is.
Right.
So I know you guys have more in the US, but you also have way more.
A lot more people. But proportionately, I doubt it's significantly more,
Yeah. So that's a good point. That's a problem, because how do you build a university educated population of massage therapists if you don't have university educated people to teach them? And you could have them, like, they could learn stuff from other, like, physiotherapists or nurses or, kinesiologists or exercise physiologists that might have the education to teach there, but, they don't do what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I see a very, very long learning curve ahead for that process to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I guess makes sense with what you said. In 25 years, you're probably not going to see it in another 25 years either, but
no, probably not.
Yeah. But these conversations are good to have. I think if we don't have these conversations, then, nothing's going to happen.
No, and we'll get somewhere. We'll move in a certain direction and see where we get, recognizing where some of the challenges and things are ahead of us. And those of us who still believe in trying to do good things are still going to work towards improving things. So even though I may not, believe that we'll get to that kind of ending point with it, I'm still going to work towards, making things better for us in the field somehow or other, whatever that turns to look like.
Yeah. No, that's great, Whitney. And I really appreciate you doing the work that you do. And I've never taken one of your courses, but I've only heard good things. And I know of your work, and I know that you're trying to do all the right things to elevate the profession and to give people information that's going to help them be better therapists. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I feel like we could just talk forever, but I know that there's that cognitive load of people probably.
That's right.
I can only listen to Eric when he talks so much. It's been an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to turn this off. So just before we leave, what's your website? Where can people find out what you're teaching, or how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, people can always get in touch with me through our company, the Academy of Clinical Massage, and that is at academyofclinicalmassage.com, and can email me directly, Whitney at Academy of Clinical Massage.
Amazing. Check out Whitney. Check out his stuff. He's got great things out there, and if you want to learn lots of fantastic things, it sounds like you have a very different way of and a very I would say probably more evidence-based way of doing your online education. So I appreciate that. So thanks again, Whitney.
Thank you so much. Great talking with you, Eric.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you can be notified of future episodes. Purvis Versus is available on all major podcast directories. If you enjoyed this episode, please share on all your social media platforms. If you'd like to connect with me, I can be reached through my website, ericpurvis.com, or send me a DM through either Facebook or Instagram at ericpurvisrmt.